トビデオ
Guess what, nerds? It's Gall Force time again. So to recap for those of you who just got here, in 1986, future Bubblegum Crisis Studios, Artmake and AIC joined forces to create Gall Force, an adaptation of a 3D photo novel for the monthly Model Graphics magazine. No, really. The 1986 film is about a race of cute anime girls called the Solnoids engaged with a seemingly endless interstellar conflict with the far more alien-looking Paranoids. The plot being focused around a singular unit of said anime girls on the ship Starleaf, trying to meet back up with their fleet after being separated from it in battle. During the journey, most of the girls die, but the survivors end up uncovering a secret plot by the higher-ups involving an experimental terraformed planet and a brand new Solnoid Paranoid hybrid, and, long story short, Garden of Eden, yada yada yada, birth of humanity.
You're a lot like Patty, but down there, you're different.
The success of Gall Force immediately spawned a sequel, Gall Force 2 Destruction, the very next year. Taking place 10 years later where the war is still going on with no end in sight, the point of view character is now Luffy, the hot-headed pilot who was the first to die in the last movie. And I'm sorry, but we've already made the joke, moving on. Revived from stasis for reasons that would take way too long to explain, Luffy joins up with another group of cute anime girls and is forced to choose between her duty as a faceless soldier or having to save the planet that will become Earth from falling to Solnoid High Command wanting to test their brand new star system destroyer on a group of paranoids in the area. Ultimately, she makes the right decision, helps destroy the Star Destroyer, ensures the survival of young planet Earth, and the sequel ends with Luffy and the rest of the group traveling off to God knows where. With an ending like that, you know Artmake and AIC already had another title up their sleeves. They're going to be turning this sequel into a trilogy, wrapping everything the series thus far has been building up to in one big explosive finale. So picking up where we last left off, Luffy, Shieldy, Spee, Amy, and different Caddy have been picked up by a Solnoid rescue vehicle and are informed that they, along with the entirety of the Solnoid army that's still remaining, are being brought to the Sigma Nar star system, a desolate graveyard of a galaxy with a red giant sun and a dead planet from a failed Solnoid terraforming project called Embryo. As soon as they make their arrival, the girls are brought to meet with the head of Solnoid's intelligence division, Lieutenant Nebulart, who just so happens to be
Oh, no way. That's a real big surprise.
OG Caddy informs the rest of the ladies that the reason why they've been summoned is that Solnoid High Command has decided to make Sigma Nars the location of the war's final battle. But before you go off thinking that this is good news, here's the thing. The reason why this will be the final battle between the Solnoids and Paranoids is because both races will be using their entire arsenal of star system destroyer ships in the battle. In short, both sides have decided that the only way to end this war is to end each other.
Everything will be destroyed, with nothing left behind but stardust.
Naturally, OG Caddy and the rest aren't too keen on the idea of mutual genocide, so they hatch up a plan. OG Caddy tells them that maybe, just maybe, if they can reactivate the terraforming project on Embryo, it could be a reminder to both races what they have lost in this long and extremely pointless war, which will provide the eventual avenue to peace. It's a long shot, but we've seen all the movies. Long shot plans often have a shot at working out. Or do they? Released on November 2nd, 1988, Gall Force 3 Stardust War is the grand finale to the Gall Force franchise up to this point. Not to the franchise as a whole, of course, there's still plenty more that needs to be milked from this forgotten cash cow. Rather, it's the finale to the current story arc that we have been following for the past 2 years. I wouldn't call it the perfect ending to the trilogy, as we'll see in a second, but it really does wrap everything up in a neat package, especially in regards to its themes. Gall Force 2 is the moment the franchise figured out where it wanted to go with its story, and Gall Force 3 is where all of that pays off in a mostly satisfying manner. But how exactly does it do that? Fair warning, I will be tossing out massive spoilers pretty early on in this video because it's unavoidable if I want to talk about everything else this anime has to offer, so keep that in mind if you choose not to pause this video and come back after watching Stardust War. First, let's begin with a few critiques. For being this grand finale to an arc involving a last battle with entire fleets of planet destroyers, Stardust War might just be the talkiest of the Gall Force anime we've seen thus far. The first 15 minutes is just OG Caddy sitting everyone down and going over all the information we've already absorbed from watching the last two entries, except now the info has just a little more clarity. For example, we get the information that the Paranoids are not just a race of morphing amoeba people, but might actually just be a race of sentient cum. Oh yeah, you heard me right. Living semen creatures.
Solenoid physiology shows that our bodies contain unused vestigial organs. Closer examination revealed that death was caused by the insertion of a foreign object into their bodies. An object of a completely unknown type.
How does the baby get in the lady's belly?
On the whole, Stardust War might just be 50% exposition. Like full scale, this might as well just be a college lecture exposition. I'm not totally against this because, as I said before, it does give us extra context to the events in the story, answering every question and tying up every loose end and all that. The problem is that the characterization really suffers for it. Shieldy, Spee, and Amy weren't the most three-dimensional characters, but they did have some level of agency and brief moments to show us that they were in fact characters operating in a story. Here, they feel more like vessels specifically built to absorb all the information Lieutenant Nebulard is dishing out. And OG Caddy also ceases to be a real character the moment she and the rest of the squadron go down to Embryo, find the terraforming supercomputer, and go, "Hey, why don't we ask the computer some questions?"
Their aim was to create an artificial world in the cosmos, a new home for the solenoid race, and this world eventually became green with life.
Luffy still is the character in this anime with the most, characterization, but not by much. For most of the runtime, she's just another party to all the exposition that's being thrown down, and it pretty much blends in with Shieldy and the rest, only standing out through her occasional hot-headed bitching.
It's freezing in here, and it smells really moldy.
But then the anime reaches the climax, and here's where the spoilers start, kids. The terraforming embryo plan does not work. If anything, it only just buys each side a few more precious seconds before they are immediately blasting planet-annihilating death lasers at each other. And Luffy gets a character moment that just emphasizes the sheer tragedy of her character. She's a soldier at heart, and she knows the war she's fighting in is spelling the end of her people, but now she has the choice to go out fighting to the bitter end, like she always wanted to do.
I know we'll meet again somewhere. If everything the captain said back there is really true, then this'll all happen again someday.
And now we get the promised Stardust War from the title. Animation for the previous titles, Nobuyuki Kitajima, was of course retained, and it really shows. The Stardust War, as we see, only really takes about 5 to 10 minutes of screen time in an hour-long OVA, but Kitajima and his team makes the most out of those minutes. There was definitely a turnover in key animators between 2 and 3. Masami Obari is absent this go around, for example, but more than making up for that is the inclusion of Koji Ito. Ito is a master of highly detailed and explosive action, resulting in equally highly detailed and explosive destruction. I don't know for certain which cut Ito did for Stardust War, but I do know for certain that there are some shots where you feel his fingerprints all over them. It's a good way to end out this trilogy, just with a massive space battle full of gigantic spacecraft trading lasers with each other before exploding in plumes of fiery death. And the presentation only makes it better. I will admit, Luffy flying off to join the battle while the theme to the original movie begins playing did elicit a strong fist pump out of me. Though this does raise the question of whether or not Stardust War is undercutting its own message of the utter tragedy of such a pointless and destructive war by portraying it this awesomely. The answer of course is, yeah, they totally are undercutting their own message here. There is a poignancy to the whole finale. The cast we've been following since Destruction, flat as they are, do realize they have been given a front row seat to their race's own self-inflicted destruction, and their last-ditch plan to avoid all that fails miserably. but I don't think it really gets enough play here. The only one who appears to be the most broken up about it is Shieldy, and I think she's only sad that the Solenoids getting wiped out means that Luffy's also getting wiped out. It's a moment that really solidifies her role as Rabby with a dye job.
You know, I'm really glad I met you guys. I sure learned a lot of good things.
The anime also pulls the ultimate cowardly maneuver by not showing any of the named characters by the big one on screen, just their character models fading out over the battle's big conclusion, implying that they all died off screen. Another way Stardust War undercuts its own messaging, robbing us of actually seeing the demise of the characters we have been experiencing the story through, further downplaying the tragedy of seeing entire civilizations get erased in a blink of an eye. But hey, we at least got to see a crumbling star cruiser slam into a massive dreadnought and explode into millions of pieces, and that turns the tragedy of seeing two races warring themselves into extinction into something that's actually kinda badass. Even with all that in mind, I really feel like the themes of Stardust War, and by extension Gall Force, still come through. Let me explain. The themes of Gall Force have always been the futility of war. We never get a chance to wonder what exactly the Solenoids and Paranoids are fighting over, or what even really began the conflict in the first place. We don't even know exactly how long this conflict is going on. In the big picture, it doesn't matter. There's a chance that the high command on both sides have long since forgotten the reason why war broke out in the first place. Stardust War is really where this theme gets hammered home. At this point, in the ass end of the tail end of the war, there is nothing to be fought over since the home planets of both races were destroyed in between the first and second anime. Now, all both sides want is the other side to be dead, and they have crossed the point where they are willing to sacrifice their civilization if it means getting to revoke the other civilization's existing privileges. If you haven't caught on by now, this definitely mirrors current events at the time that Japan was caught in the middle of.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The late 80s may have been a time when the Cold War was winding on down in retrospect, but that still did not mean it was over. There was still fear in the air about it growing hot, and the United States and the Soviet Union doing something regrettable that would cause smaller, less involved nations like Japan to be caught in the crossfire. The Solenoids and Paranoids are obvious analogs to these nations in how much what little remains of their societies and military structures is all based around fighting the other party. And the whole climax is the worst case scenario between those two states, like a way less comical Dr. Strangelove. They even drop a specific term that was bandied around quite a bit in those days.
MAD? Mutual Assured Destruction?
Correct.
But honestly, that reading alone just feels too surface level. All the anime is saying regarding that is, boy, it sure would suck if the Cold War reached a breaking point, especially for any certain island nations that could potentially get caught in the crossfire. The theme that actually resonates in this anime is a theme that only gets introduced in the last half of Stardust War, but it does end up rounding out the trilogy in a sufficient way. So after the Solenoids and Paranoids decide to launch their own mutual suicide attacks, OG Caddy decides to launch her own backup plan. So the reason why OG Caddy had android copies of herself made was as a means to monitor the Solenoid contact attempts during the war and determine where exactly the most ideal successor race can originate at. It's stated that the planet Terra, where we last left the Solenoid Paranoid hybrid race to take root, still hasn't seen measurable success at the rate it's going, but the girls also figure out that it's their best shot they've seen so far. So, utilizing the remains of a project that was to send out Solenoid DNA out to different corners of space that was ultimately cancelled by High Command, OG Caddy puts the full history of the Solenoids into the capsule. All of their history, mythology, culture, technology, and records of their failed war with the Paranoids. All just so the Solenoid Paranoid hybrid race, humanity, can avoid making the same mistakes they did.
The crystallization of millions of years of solenoid history, the technology of our star-built activators, all of our science, I pass on to you.
And that's when it hit me. You know those moments in sci-fi and fantasy stories where the characters come across the entire history of a lost, extinct precursor race so that they learn why that race is no longer around anymore? The Gall Force trilogy is an anime all about that precursor race. Stardust War is looking through the point of view of that fabled race of long-lost ancients, a race that ultimately destroyed itself in its war-crazed hubris. And we see exactly how they can gather enough resources together to send the message to the future of a newborn race that they will never see flourish, to warn them to not make the same mistakes they did. And maybe it's because current events are reminding me about people who fail to learn from history being doomed to repeat it. This theme actually resonated with me, lighting a small light of hope in what could have ultimately been a pointless downer ending. Though knowing that more Gall Force sequels were made after this, something tells me that some of the people of Terra might not have been paying attention during those lessons. The Stardust War is really not the ideal ending to a trilogy. It bogs itself down with its talky exposition scenes that take up most of the runtime, and the final space battle, as good as it is, lacks a real catharsis factor to help bring home the drama a story like this desperately needs. But its theme of sending a light into the future and presenting that from an inspired perspective does make it a worthy ending nonetheless. An ending worth watching at the very least. But we're not done with the Gall Force franchise just yet. The trilogy may be over, but as long as AIC and ArtMate keep getting their paychecks, history will have a habit of repeating itself.